Perfect. Thanks, Cheyenne. Welcome everyone to Virtual Road Trip Food Edition. My name is Callie McCune and I'm the Manager of Engagement at the Indiana Historical Society. It's wonderful to have all of you here this evening. At the Indiana Historical Society, we are Indiana's storyteller connecting people to the past. We do that by collecting millions upon millions of pieces of paper that tell Indiana's unique stories. These are things like recipes or cookbooks, photographs, letters, diaries, maps, menus, all of these things that tell Indiana's story. And then we want to find intriguing and unexpected ways to share and remember the past, whether that is through publications, exhibitions, or events like this. It's through these pieces that we tell the diverse, unconventional, and even saucy stories of Indiana, and to inspire a future grounded in our state's uniting values and principles. I love a good road trip, and I hope you do as well. And I always think that there's some essential pieces that make a road trip a great one. You need a reliable set of wheels. Losing a tire along the way is never good. You definitely need the perfect mixtape of tunes, some great places to go, and a solid snack along the way. If you know me, you know I'm partial to the gummy bears that come from Albany's up in Hobart, Indiana. So try those out the next time you're on a road trip. When I go somewhere new, one of the best ways I like to learn about the place is through their food. And if we're being real, sometimes Indiana's food doesn't get the best rap. It's often deemed bland or uninteresting or just full of carbohydrates. So tonight, my colleague Cheyenne and I are going to try to debunk a few of those connotations by digging into Indiana's past through some of its favorite food and food history. But before we get started, I just want to make sure that we're going over a few pieces of Zoom logistics. If you haven't been on it the last almost 2 years, we're going to make sure you're ready to go. You're all muted for tonight, but we would love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to add comments to the chat box as we go along. Just make sure that you're responding to both panelists and attendees so everyone can see. Keep an eye on that box because we might drop some links as we go along the way, and watch out for some polls that we might ask some questions too for you to help us out. Don't worry if you miss any links. We'll be sending them to you in a thank you email tomorrow. I'll be sharing my screen for most of tonight. You can toggle between how you see that screen in the top left-hand corner of your screen. Look at that view options button. That'll let you make Cheyenne or I bigger or smaller and kind of see our slides and our images and some of our videos even better. And just so you're aware, we are recording this presentation. So for tonight, we are going to go to 7 stops along this road trip. Some of these are places you might have heard of, some of them you might not, but we're hoping to uncover some of Indiana's delicious food past. And we know there's a lot more from where this came from. We hope this is a start, and maybe you want to dig more into Indiana's past or make your own road trip, get out whenever that might feel right to you, or take another one via Google Maps. We also tried to pick stops that you can visit most of them. So we hope that you'll maybe, if you're on your way somewhere, you might take a swing by and stop at these places. And the last thing is the magic of a virtual road trip is I didn't have to worry about an itinerary that made logical sense. So we will be jumping around the state and around geographies. Know that you could pick and choose as you might want to create your own. So with that, I want to get us started. And I'm going to get us started with a poll. Shan and I have been arguing about this for months as we've been putting this together about what is Indiana's signature food. So we want to know what you think. So we're going to launch the poll. And we want you to vote what you think is Indiana's most iconic food. We'll give you our answers as we're going along tonight, but we love to know what you thought. So far, we definitely have a clear winner, Cheyenne. They're all agreeing with you.
Because that's the only answer.
We'll leave that up for a few minutes and we'll kind of give you the answer as we go, or give you the results as we go along later. But right now the tenderloin is kicking everything else's butt. So maybe the tenderloin will keep winning, but I like the one person that voted for a brain sandwich. Thank you for that. When I think about Indiana and Indiana's food, I often talk about the big three. When Indiana's history, around when we're becoming a state, let's like say 1830, Indiana has three big industries. It's corn, it's pigs, and it's whiskey. And if you think about whiskey, whiskey comes from corn. So we wanted to get started with answering the question, why does Indiana look so much like this? Now, not necessarily a random guy standing like a ghost in the middle of a cornfield, but why is there so much corn that you would drive by, or so many fields that you would drive by as you're making your way along your road trip? And the answer to that is we have to say thank you to the glaciers. Now, 2.6 million years ago, Indiana was covered with these immense sheets of ice called glaciers. Might not have had the mountains in the background, but it might have looked something like this. I was having trouble finding pictures of glaciers on like more flat lands. But as the glaciers melted, they not only flattened the land, but and so that's why we have the nice sort of smooth land that is Indiana, but they left behind the sands and the rocks and the dirt. You can see it really clearly on this map here. You know, that kind of area as you're driving maybe to Bloomington or Bedford, when all of a sudden it just starts to get a little rocky. That's because that's where the glaciers stopped. And if you look at this map on the far right, you can see where the blue line is. That's where our glaciers stopped. So those areas are not only flatter, but they left behind all those great mineral deposits that make the soil awesome. They also gave us a whole bunch of groundwater underneath, which is what we need to keep going too. So again, thank you, glaciers. All that combination of soil and typography and climate make Indiana one of the perfect places to grow crops. So much so that we are often called the Corn Belt. It's this area, there's a yellow in the bottom left-hand corner of that map. It's this kind of yellow belt throughout the Midwest, think Nebraska all the way, maybe even into Ohio, where it is a great place to grow corn. Lots of other things too. We grow more soybeans now than we do corn, but corn is key. That yellow area grows 40% of the world's corn crops. They make more than 10 billion bushels of corn. So that's a lot of corn a year. Again, today's leading crop is soybeans, but we still grow the 5th most corn of any state in the country. Now, most of that corn goes to make ethanol, goes to feed animals, but we do grow a quarter of the nation's popcorn, and it is Indiana's official state snack food. So I want to toss it over to Cheyenne so she can tell us more about why popcorn is so important to Indiana and its history.
All right, well, like Callie said, I'm Cheyenne, and I'm the assistant at the Indiana Historical Society for the Education and Engagement team. So I love this photo because of the little girls eating the popcorn, and it kind of shows how much popcorn is loved. So of course, Orville Redenbacher is the name that most people think of when it comes to popcorn. And of course, he did not invent popcorn, even though many people believe that. So how did he come to be the name in the popcorn business and known as the Popcorn King? Well, Orville was born in Brazil, Indiana. He went on to Purdue University and majored in agriculture and graduated in 1928. So in the 1940s, he managed Princeton's Farms, which was a 12,000 acre farm in southern Indiana. He first became involved with popcorn there. The property had one of the first popcorn processing plants in the United States, and the farm began producing hybrid popcorn, and Orville became the first to test into making a better popcorn. But Orville had a lofty goal. He wanted to create the best popcorn out there. To him, the idea of popcorn was not only to taste good, but it had to pop bigger and not produce as many duds. And he succeeded in that. So by the 1950s, Orville wanted to head out on his own. He bought a seed company with his business partner, Charlie Bowman. They used the profits from selling farm supplies to work on cross-pollinated popcorn varieties. So at IHS, our archive is full of paper, but at the Orville Redenbacher Company archives, there are over 30,000 popcorn hybrids that they have crossbred over 40 years to find the perfect kernel. Once they got the corn right, it was all about the corn drying techniques. The golden ratio was 44:1 in the volume of popped to unpopped corn. To get there, the company dried kernels on the ear, minimizing the number of unpopped kernels. So by 1965, they had found the holy grail of hybrid yellow popping corn, one that achieved the highest popping volume ratio and was fluffier and popped nearly twice as large as the competitor's popcorn. So 5 years later, they decided to get this popcorn on the map, and we are all glad that they did. They knew that they needed to create a market for the popcorn, glamorizing the snack food and showing that their product was the best. Before Redenbacher, the dried popcorn industry was pretty stale. Most unpopped popcorn was sold only in the Midwest and the South as a simple, inexpensive food. Quality and brands were rarely emphasized. So they went out and hired a marketing agency who turned Orville into the Colonel Sanders of popcorn. And because of Redenbacher's unique name, they added Redenbacher's face to the packaging and named it Orville Redenbacher's Gourmet Popcorn. When they had to sell it, then they had to sell it. Check out this ad from 1977. And notice how he is.
Hello, I'm Orville Redenbacher.
Sorry, did you want to?
No, you're good.
Can Ms. Lucy tell which popcorn is my famous gourmet popping corn? Start poppy, Lucy.
Huh?
Go ahead.
Oh, that's yours.
Right. Mine pops so much bigger and fluffier. It's blowing the top right off the popper. And look, near every kernel popped.
Most every kernel popped, too.
Taste my gourmet popping corn. You like it better, or my name isn't Orville Redenbacher.
Eh?
Redenbacher.
Sure, help yourself.
I absolutely love that ad. It's great. So like I was saying, they highlighted in the commercials, and all of them, they highlight how big and fluffy the popcorn gets. So Redenbacher traveled by car across the United States to get store owners to carry and sell his product. The first sales of Redenbacher's popcorn began in 1971, and it was the largest share of the United States supermarket sales of popcorn in 1979, which continues to this day. So microwave popcorn was introduced in 1982 by Pillsbury, and Redenbacher entered the microwave popcorn market in 1983, which was met with instant acceptance. But fun fact, Orville did not like microwave popcorn, and he believed that stove pop tasted even better. The company was sold in the Hunt Wesson and then ConAgra Foods, but Redenbacher's legacy lives on. Redenbacher was inducted in the first National Popcorn Hall of Fame, which I did not know was a thing until this, and received the honorary doctorate from Purdue in 1988. Sadly, Redenbacher did die in 1995, but still lives on through advertisements and his tasty popcorn.
So our next stop on,
Hello.
or not more Orville, the next stop on our tour, we're going to talk about what you said was what you voted as the second most iconic of Hoosier foods, which would be sugar cream pie. And to do this, we're going to bring in two of our friends from IHS. They are Kate Scott and Kathy Mulder, who both work in our library. And I will say every time someone asks, what is the history of sugar cream pie? I always start with sending them to Kate. So they will tell you a little bit more about sugar cream pie.
Hey, welcome to our stop on our little mini food road trip here. Today we're going to talk about some sugar cream pie, which most people love. I'll talk a little bit about the history of it, and then Kathy can talk about some of the commercial history. Now, my name is Kate Scott. I'm a librarian at IHS, and this is something I get asked about often, is what's the history of sugar cream pie? What's the original recipe? Where's the recipe? But there isn't one. There's not one at all. It arose separately in a lot of different places, including Shaker and Amish baking. These are communities that contributed a lot to Indiana's food history, especially the Amish, and this is also why sugar cream pie tends to be a little more popular in the north of the state. I don't think we've introduced Kathy yet.
Oh, that's okay. I'm Kathy Mulder. I also work in the archives and library with Kate. I think we worked together for about 6 or 7 years.
Yeah. So continuing with the history of that, it's what we call a desperation pie, and this is just such a strange name for something that is so rich and creamy and delicious, but really all that refers to is that it is something you can make with what is usually in your pantry, no matter what season of the year it is. It's also very easy to make. I made one for the first time yesterday. That's one of the 3 pies we're going to be tasting today. Yes, and the recipe I used was the earliest recipe I know of. That doesn't mean it's the earliest one that exists, but this is from the Hoosier cookbook, published in 1976. And there's a note next to the sugar cream pie recipe, and it says that this is 160 years old. We don't know what the knowledge behind that is, but this is supposedly 160 years old. It includes sugar, flour, salt, cream, vanilla, and butter. That's what you pour into your pie shell. Now, sugar cream pie really only has one consistent ingredient, which is
Sugar.
Sugar. It's sugar, although it does usually have cream or milk in it. A lot of people nowadays like to put a little cinnamon or nutmeg on. That's not typical with the early recipes I've seen in IHS cookbooks. And this is soon to be an IHS historic cookbook as part of our collection. I'll be adding it pretty soon. Now, that's one we're going to try. I do wonder how much this recipe has been altered over time, because it includes vanilla, which, although people had it at the time, it would have been pretty pricey. So a true desperation pie might not have vanilla in it, because you wouldn't have that all the time. Can a sugar cream pie have eggs in it?
No, that's a custard pie.
Kathy has spoken.
That's my opinion.
Yeah, no, most bakers would say the same, at least in Indiana. We are going to try 2 other recipes today. One is from the Pots and Pans Pie Store here in Indianapolis. I highly recommend it. It's actually a very similar recipe. It's pretty traditional. The only thing it doesn't share with the other recipe is that it doesn't have salt in it. They also like to, and I'll show this here, they put a little like crusty creme brulee top on it.
That is a thick pie.
Which, yeah, the texture is great. We'll try it soon. Here's another question about sugar cream pie. Have you ever heard the term finger pie?
No. Sounds gross.
Yeah, no, it sounds like something Arya Stark would make, but it is supposedly one of the traditional names of sugar cream pie. I don't know if any of you out there have heard this before, but it comes from the idea that a lot of people stir the pie with a finger in the middle of baking so that the ingredients don't separate. I question how common this really is, because none of our pies have that much separation to them. We didn't stir them. I don't know anybody else who's told me that they stir their pie.
Sounds dangerous.
And it also, finger pie just sounds gross. So that's why I don't like that name. All right, so in addition to those 2 pies, we're going to try a 3rd one, and Kathy's going to tell you about that.
And I'm going to show it just really quickly here. This is the Wix sugar cream pie, and to me, Wix is the sugar cream pie. My mom bought this one during the holidays, and we would eat it. But I can tell you where Wix came from. So Wix, you'll find it in your freezer section at the grocery store, but it originated in Winchester, Indiana. So a man named Dwayne Wickersham started a restaurant, and he used his grandmother's recipes at the restaurant, and the pies became so popular that he actually sold out the restaurant portion, and then he just continued with the pie making. And so he and his family started to then mass produce the pies in Winchester, and so several generations now have been involved in the family business. So that's how they grew the business. And now you find the pies in the freezer section at grocery stores in Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, as far as St. Louis, maybe further than that. But yeah, Wix has always been like my gold standard of sugar cream pie.
What's so good about it?
It's the texture, and the crust is a little salty. It is a lard crust.
I like lard crust.
Yeah, it's a little bit salty, so you have the sweet and the salty together.
So beware, if you are a vegetarian, probably go with a different pie.
Yeah, not the Wix.
Yeah, this is also where I need to admit that I never had sugar cream pie until I was an adult.
Oh.
I'm from Indianapolis. We made a lot of fruit pies, a lot of pumpkin pies. It wasn't until a friend from Pendleton made me one when I was in my 20s that I finally had the delight of sugar cream pie.
And the fun thing with Wix is, and I didn't realize this, there's actually a Mrs. Wix pie shop in Winchester. So you can actually go there and try 30 different kinds of pies.
And this is on the pie trail, right?
Yes, the Hoosier Pie Trail. I think foodways.com.
It's Indiana Foodways that put it together.
Yeah.
And you can look it up online if you want to go visit lots of locally famous pie spots in Indiana. I will note that Pots and Pans is not on it, so you should also come to Indianapolis and have some Pots and Pans pie, which is absolutely my favorite sugar cream pie that you can currently get. Shall we try some?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, please.
So let's start with the traditional eldest recipe here.
Okay, yes, show your pie.
Okay.
Homemade by Kate. That's almost a pudding texture.
It is. It doesn't have eggs in it, but it's a little custardy. I think that has to do with the balance of flour and cream. It's really a little sweet for my taste.
It's great, and the crust is really good.
It's a butter crust, and the next one's a butter crust too. This is our Pots and Pans sugar creme brulee pie. I think their crust is really good. It's really a thick pie. I like the texture of it. I also love the crust. It's almost like a dense croissant.
Yeah. It's very thick. I like that texture. That's great.
And it also, if you like sugar cream pie, but don't want it to be too sweet, this is a really one. It's a really good one to get. And it has that nice crispy top to it too.
And now for my favorite.
I've never had a Wix pie before.
So on the label it says it's just made from milk, cream, sugar, butter, and flour. So it didn't even have vanilla on the list.
So these are all, we haven't had this one yet, but these are all really different pies, even though they're basically made with the same ingredients.
Still my favorite. What I love is where the filling and the crust comes together, there's almost a third layer in there. And it's, I love it.
I like that layer on pies where the crust and the filling meet. That's good. That also is not super sweet either.
Yeah. Not as sweet as the pie that you made.
The Pots and Pans is still my favorite, but good job, Wix. So we want to thank you all for coming to our stop on this Indiana food road trip, and hopefully we'll see you again sometime. Welcome to our stop on
Well, that was great. They brought me a little bit of the pie afterwards to try, and I will agree the historic recipe was just a little sweet, but they were all great. So we did have a question. If you're not in Indianapolis, you can get a Wix pie shipped to you nationwide. They come frozen and defrost just fine. If you look it up, you can find it right on their website. And we'll try to drop that in the chat in just a minute. So I'm gonna toss it back over to Cheyenne to keep us going on our road trip.
All right, so throughout our planning process, we've been debating what is Indiana's food, like we mentioned earlier. And you guys agree with me that tenderloin is Indiana's food, and you guys voted by 59%. 59% of people on this webinar voted tenderloin. So I agree. I think that pork tenderloin is Indiana's signature food. But to understand why pork tenderloin is so important to Indiana, we have to start with the hogs. Pork has been one of Indiana's key agricultural products almost since the start of the state. By the 1850s, Indiana was second place in hog production, losing out only to our neighbors, Ohio. In the 1860s, due to the growth and development of our railroad in Indiana, the Midwest increased production of corn and hogs. So often farms would pack pork in winter months, butchering and salting when it was cold, and leaving the summer for crop harvesting. So in 1870s, Indiana used its railroads to expand meat packing, and Indiana is the fourth largest pork packer in the country. With refrigerated rail cars, fresh meat was available to East Coast cities rather than just cured meat. Still today, hogs are the cornerstone of agriculture in the Hoosier state. Just ask the pig sculpture in the State House, which you can see on your screen. So I promised, of course, to talk about pork tenderloin, but it was because of Indiana's pork industry that we have the famous pork tenderloin in the first place. So everyone's recipe is different and people like their tenderloins all kinds of ways, and each one seems to be unique. So we're going to launch a poll and see how you like your tenderloin.
Shannon and I have lots of opinions on this question. I will say that. So we hope you do too.
Yes, very opinionated.
Well, we find that most Hoosiers have opinions on these questions.
So of course, the options are having the large thin patty that hangs over the bun, or having a small, thick and juicy patty, which I'm partial to, or having all of the toppings you can think of, like tomato and pickle and onion and lettuce and mayonnaise and mustard and ketchup, which is what I like, or just having it plain. And it does look like you guys agree with the toppings, but not the proportional to the bread part so 69% of you want all of the toppings on your tenderloin, and 54% of you want it way bigger than the bun. So how did it get so famous in Indiana, and why does everybody love the pork tenderloin? Well, Nick Freienstein was a son to German immigrants and began selling sandwiches and burgers out on a cart in downtown Huntington. He started selling his version of the new recipe, which was similar to the Wiener Schnitzel. And the Wiener Schnitzel is usually made with veal, but because of Indiana's lack of veal and a surplus of pork, Freienstein made the sandwich that is now loved by most Hoosiers. So Nick added pickles and onion to his new sandwich, and because of his cart success, he opened Nick's Kitchen in 1908, which is still open, so you can go visit it still today. Freienstein sold the business to two local men in the 1920s, but the recipe is still almost identical to the original. So Nick's Kitchen still uses the similar preparation to the sandwich from 1904. So pork loins are sliced, tenderized, and marinated overnight before being dipped in an egg and milk mixture, dredged in flour, and breaded with saltine cracker crumbs and then deep fried. Seems super healthy, I know. So of course, there are debates on whether Nick's was actually the first place to produce the tenderloin. But the pork tenderloin sandwich can be found all throughout the Midwest, and likely due to the German immigrants. Iowa, Ohio, and Illinois all have their own versions of the sandwich and think that they are the first ones to make the sandwich. But us true Hoosiers know that this is the state with the best tenderloin.
Okay, so Cheyenne's given her opinion. Y'all agree with her. Tenderloin, Indiana's iconic food, or 59% of you agree with her. But you're going to have to walk with me on a limb for what I think might be one of Indiana's most iconic foods. A lot of places have their thing. Chicago gets its hot dogs and its deep dish pizza. New Orleans gets its beignets. Cincinnati has its own version of chili. You could argue it's a pasta topping. We won't get into that argument. We're talking about Indiana. But for me, I might argue one of Indiana's most iconic foods or unique foods is the chicken and noodles. When I moved to Indiana about 8 years ago, there were 3 things that I thought were pretty particular about Indiana food. One is the availability of like nacho cheese sauce at any pizza place to dip your breadsticks into. And I've tried to look this up as a historian and have failed. So if anyone has a lead for me on why this is, please send me an email. The second thing I found peculiar was that people like peanut butter sandwiches to dip their chili into, at least in central Indiana. It's a little weird. But the third thing is this dish called chicken and noodles, which is a staple at church dinners and at picnics. My first experience was at a pitch-in at IHS, which is Indiana's way of saying a potluck. And I had a friend that could not believe that I had not had chicken and noodles. She grew up in North Central Indiana. So on the table plopped 2 big crock pots. The first one was full of mashed potatoes, thick with butter and creamy with milk. And then the other one had this concoction of egg noodles with shredded chicken and then a chicken gravy in it. Think of it like a carbohydrate heaven. And you put the 2 together, the mashed potatoes on the bottom, the chicken on top, and you eat it. And this is a pretty strong tradition in Indiana. But for me, what does this dish say about Indiana's roots? One talks about the Amish, who settled in sort of that north middle area of the state. Almost any diner you go into or cafe, you'll find an option for chicken and waffles if you're like between Michigan and Route 40, the national road. And the Amish came to Indiana about 1838. They originally come from Switzerland, but most of the people in Indiana of the Amish find their roots from Ohio or Pennsylvania. They come west and settle here. And today, Indiana has the 3rd largest Amish population in the country. And the Amish follow this version of Protestant Christianity that emphasizes a simple life, plain dress, and a slowness to adopt modern technology if you adopt it at all. There's a value on farming, on manual labor, and the old ways. There's also a lot of German influences, and they often will speak a version of like a Dutch, they sometimes call Pennsylvania Dutch, but it's really a German variant. So if you're working on the farm all day, this dish sort of feels like it represents that. It's simple food. You can make it for a crowd, but it's that simplicity, but it's also rich in carbohydrates because the first time you ever needed the carbo load was when you were working on a farm. At that time, we're talking sort of pre-1940s living on a farm. You're going to grab something for breakfast. Maybe it's breakfast pie, maybe it's something else. And then you're going to get out and do your chores. And then everyone comes together for supper, for dinner, which is the big lunchtime meal. And then you'd have supper at the end of the day. So if you need something to keep you going, something rich in carbohydrates like chicken and noodles is definitely going to keep you going. But the other thing that I think about this dish, which I've gotten to know a lot about living here, is that it is something that can feed so many people, which feels so very Midwestern and so very Indiana. It's all about communal eating. And so whether it's chicken and noodles or green bean casserole, or even the pies that Kate and Kathy were talking about, this is all a food about generosity and getting people together in a shared meal. And I think that's really a part of what our food traditions here are. So that's my argument for Indiana signature food. None of you voted for water, I will say, which is Indiana's official state drink. So I just want to put that out there. If you don't agree, call your state legislator, let them know. So we're going to hear from our second special guest next. This is from my friend Nicole Martinez-Legrand, who's the coordinator of multicultural collections at IHS. And she's done some really interesting research into the Oriental Shoyu company and is going to talk to us a little bit about Squab, which are pigeons, which I did not make that connection until we were talking about it. So here you go.
Hi, I'm Nicole Martinez Legrand, the Multicultural Collections Coordinator here at the Indiana Historical Society. Today, our road trip is going to take us up to Northeast Indiana to Whitley County to the town or the city called Columbia City, which is just outside of Fort Wayne. And so we're going to learn about the Oriental Shoyu Company. So before we learn about the company, we have to learn about the man who started it. This is Shinzo Oki, a native of Japan. He would come to Columbia City, Indiana in the early 1900s. He would attend Columbia City High School and graduate in 1907. After graduation, he would later to move to Detroit and later Chicago, where he would work as an importer. And so one of the many things that he would probably import and sell was soy sauce. Soy sauce and other condiments like the like were very popular in the early 20th century, as they are today. So in the late 1910s, he started the Oriental Shoyu Company in Chicago, Illinois. So to back up before he started that, so in 1917, he would return back to the United States from Japan after marrying his wife, Taka. And so he and Taka, while he was in Japan, he learned how to make soy sauce. It was a special fermentation process of soybeans or mung beans. And so probably 1918, the Shoyu Company was born. So he would return back to Columbia City in the early 1920s, where he would build a factory that would produce soy sauce. So let's talk about shoyu. So shoyu is actually a Japanese word for soy sauce. So shoyu was actually a play on word to help to accommodate his English speaking or US audience. So here is a newspaper advertisement from the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette in 1920. So talking about normalizing soy sauce. So this was an exquisite table sauce. Again, condiments were very big to help improve the taste of food. And so you could buy it at your local grocer for 35 cents. So with every single bottle of shoyu sauce, he would give a complimentary cookbook. So here's the cover of the cookbook. So because he had a large factory and he was producing gallons and gallons and thousands of gallons of soy sauce here in Indiana, he also evolved into pantry staples. So selling canned mixed vegetables, chow mein noodles, bean sprouts, all the fixings. So chop suey is a Chinese American dish that was very popular in the early 20th century. So he largely catered and produced recipes in his recipe book about different chop suey recipes, different ways to prepare it. So not only was Shinzo very nice, he was also very much in promoting his own culture and educating people. So here in the 1950s, he's giving a cooking demonstration, which he often did to the local home economics group. So one of the signature recipes that was in the cookbook or the recipe book was squab in nest. So squab was big business in the early 20th century. They were easy to raise. So it's basically young pigeon, so baby pigeon. So you could live in the city and raise squab in your backyard, or you can live out in the country on multiple acres and raise a larger amount of squab. So unlike the poultry business, chickens, is that you had to raise them to maturity to be able to get eggs and then to be the right size to have enough meat. But squab was very young pigeon. So that life cycle or that cycle was very short. So you could, as soon as you were hatching and raising, several month old or several week old squab, you were already bringing in another crop. So here's a 1916 article talking about the success and profitability of raising squab. So squab and nest. So unfortunately, we don't have many photos about it, but this recipe caught my eye, not only because they noted the exclusivity of this to the Oriental Shoyu Company, but squab was considered, a delicacy in the US as well as other countries throughout the world, in particular China. So bird's nest soup was a delicacy in China in the 1800s. So bird's nest, that concept of bird's nest was already established in Chinese culture or Asian culture. And so it was something that Shinzo brought back to the United States and put a new spin on. So in the recipe book, it talks about what it looks like. So talked about frying noodles in soy sauce and then forming them in a bird's nest and then placing the cooked squab on top. So the picture on the left is bird's seafood, obviously not squab, bird's nest. So you can kind of see that type of fried noodle, obviously maybe fried or dipped in soy sauce. And then the picture on the right is what squab looks like. So it's a pretty small bird, maybe about this big. So this would be a signature recipe of the Oriental Shoyu Company in Columbia City, Indiana. Thanks for coming along.
So I will say the picture on our far left of this slide is a picture of a bottle that Nicole was able to find for the Shoyu sauce company. So it's kind of cool to see some of these roots that we wouldn't normally know. And we'll also, when we send you some links tomorrow and a thank you email, we'll include an email to a video where we talked more about how this family was involved in the chicken and squab business kind of further out in Indiana too. So moving on. We're going to move on to our next stop. And when I say, gentlemen, start your engines, you probably think we're going to talk about food maybe at the Speedway and not about baking soda. But I will tell you that the Indianapolis Motor Speedway is definitely the house that baking soda built, because of the guy who is the second to the left in that far picture. His name is Tony Holman Jr. He bought the Speedway in 1945, and he bought that because his family made all of their money, a lot of their money in baking soda and the Clabber Girl Company. So in the 1850s, the Holman and Company was born in Terre Haute when brothers Francis and Herman Holman immigrated to the US from Germany. They started a wholesale grocery business that was pretty successful. There ends up being 3 brothers here, and then their son gets involved. That'd be Tony Sr. And each of them diversifies into their own product. One of them concentrates on that wholesale grocery, but one of them works in coffee and roast coffee. One of them distills liquor. They sell spices. And in 1878, they start making baking powder. By 1892, they have enough money that they can open up this big fancy building that you see on the right in downtown Terre Haute. Now, before we get too much farther, let me tell you a little bit about baking powder, because I'm super excited about baking powder. Cheyenne was a little bit concerned that I was going to talk about baking powder, but let me tell you how it revolutionizes the Midwestern kitchen and really the American kitchen. So let's think about how you want to bake a cake. If it is 1840, you live on the frontier, and it's before you have your hands on baking soda or baking powder for that, or baking powder or baking soda. You have 2 options. You can use a sponge, which means you have to whip a lot of eggs really quickly, or you can use yeast, who is a drama queen. Not only do you have to make your own yeast by fermenting fruit or vegetables and grains, then you have to make sure that the yeast doesn't die because of temperature changes. It can take a full 12 to 24 hours to get your yeast to where you want to even start making your cake. You've got to plan ahead. So baking soda is invented in 1846, and then baking powder, the holy grail, comes along in 1856. So 1846 is soda, 1856 is powder. This gives us a chemical shortcut and makes it easier to make a cake without yeast. So you're getting rid of that drama queen. So what is baking powder? Well, there are 2 types of baking powders. There's one that would be popularized by the Royal Baking Company that has baking powder is always a base and an acid, and then you've got something that's in the middle that keeps them from mixing together. because if the acid and the base are mixed together in your can, they could get a chemical reaction and cause your can to explode, which is not good. So the Royal Baking Company used cream of tartar as its base. Oh, sorry, cream of tartar, and then baking soda, and then cornstarch in the middle. Whereas Clabber Girl used alum or sodium aluminum sulfate. That was cheaper, and it actually worked faster. So it was called double acting. When there were so many different baking powders on the market, the thing was that you could not interchange them. So there were recipes for Royal, recipes for Clabber Girl, and it was sort of chaos in the cookbooks. If you try to make a Royal recipe with the baking powder that you have at home right now, you're going to have a cake that's going to rise really fast in your oven and then collapse and maybe taste a little bitter. So home cooks tended to have something that they were very committed to. They had their loyalty to a brand, and they didn't really like to change. But I will tell you that baking powder took off. In the Buckeye Cookbook, which was a bestseller in 1876, more than 50% of the recipes in that cookbook use baking powder. And by 1900, there is over 120 million pounds of baking powder being produced in the United States from 534 companies. That's a lot of baking powder by 1900. And that means that by 1930, when Tony Holman Jr. takes over the company, he's got not only a lot of competition, but he's dealing with the Great Depression. We're 2 years in. He has to figure out how he's going to modernize and keep his company in business. Not only does he have an economic downturn to deal with, but Tony sees a change in the market. These things called supermarkets were starting to take root throughout the United States. So instead of a grocer like Mr. Zwarner right here, who you would go up to and say, hey, I want a can of soup, and he could recommend which tomato brand you might want, which tomato soup you might want. You would go into a self-service grocery store, you'd choose what you wanted from the shelves, and then they'd bring it up and scan it. The other thing about a grocery store is that they were more national chains. So Tony knew that if he didn't think about making his brand national, he was going to lose out not only in his local market, but almost all his market share. So Tony took a three-pronged tactic for making this happen. The first thing he did is he saw that most people were selling their cans of baking soda for 25 cents, which was a lot of money during the Great Depression. Not everyone had a quarter, but almost everyone had a dime to spend. So he shrunk the cans to 10 ounces, made them 10 cents a piece, keeping the same margins as the 25 ounce for 25 cent cans, and made it look like he was selling his for a lot cheaper. He then gave Clabber Girl away in like a super early version of what we now think of as BOGO. For every case that a grocer bought, they would get one case for free that they could sell for pure on margins and pure for profit, sorry. So that meant that Clabber Girl was really attractive to the grocery stores and made it almost that those stores were his de facto agents. And then his last secret is that he got the Good Housekeeping seal of approval, which meant that that kitchen cooks everywhere knew that his product was the best. This aggressive marketing campaign worked, and by 1935, Clabber Girl was 23% of the baking powder market. They continued to dominate the business, becoming the leading baking powder. And even on the 100th anniversary of the company, so like 1859, they bought their two competitors as a gift to the company for its 100th birthday. Kind of a cool gift. So the baking powder part of the business ends up bankrolling the Holman grocery and even outliving it. It allows the family to diversify into real estate. And then where we started this, buying the Speedway. So again, you could say that the Indianapolis Motor Speedway is the place that baking powder built. So with that, we're going to head over to our last stop, and I'm going to toss it over to Cheyenne to talk about Burger Chef.
All right, so one restaurant that still holds a place in people's heart is Burger Chef. So my stepdad talks about how much he misses and loves Burger Chef all of the time. But of course, I never understood why it was so great in his eyes because it was gone way before I was born. So I did some digging into why it was so special to people and why did we care so much about a fast food place that is basically just Indiana's McDonald's. But the history of Burger Chef is actually really unique, and we can thank them for many of the fast food things that we know and love today. So here's the cool thing about Burger Chef. They weren't founded on the merits of great food or the passion for burgers. It was started by a team at the General Equipment Company in the 1950s, which included Robert Wildman and brothers Frank and Donald Thomas. They invented and perfected this flame broiler that could cook 600 hamburgers in an hour, and they wanted to show it off. So in the photos, you can see the schematic for the frame broiler, but also someone using it. So since they wanted to show it off, they said, let's open up a restaurant and promote our equipment, and Burger Chef was born, and the first restaurant opened in 1957. So of course this worked. They were the second largest restaurant chain in 1967. The restaurant was so popular that by 1973, there were over 1,000 restaurants. Many of the things that we know and love about fast food restaurants today can be attributed to Burger Chef. So in 1964, the Big Chef, which you can see on the PowerPoint, it had 2 hamburger patties, cheese, lettuce, and sauce with a bun in the middle, which kind of sounds familiar, right? But it wasn't until 1967 that McDonald's introduced their Big Mac. So Burger Chef also introduced the Fun Meal for kids in 1973, which included a meal, but also a toy. And this was 6 years before McDonald's Happy Meal. So they also experimented with grilling buns and salad bars just a decade earlier than competitors, which goes back to them wanting to show off how great their equipment was. And of course, we cannot forget their beloved mascots, Burger Chef and Jeff, that everyone knew and loved. So now I'm going to pass it on to Callie so that she can tell you about her favorite thing about Burger Chef. So go ahead and take it away, Callie.
So for me, one thing I love about Burger Chef is its unique architecture. Now, it was a lot of fast food restaurants. You can tell when the restaurant isn't there anymore, that used to be a Denny's or that used to be a Bob Chin's or something like that. And Burger Chef was no exception. They really took that brand and wanted to move it forward within their architecture. And Burger Chef's unique style was what the jargon might say open kite. So this sort of shape that their logo would go in, but also this post and beam that would greet you as you came in. And you can even see in the bottom right-hand corner, this is an old Burger Chef that's on Route 66 in California. It's not a Burger Chef anymore. Burger Chef is long gone, but you can tell it used to be. That iconic orange color also comes back too. So this look continued in any restaurant, no matter where they opened it. The picture on the right was downtown Indianapolis. Remember, we're talking about a restaurant equipment company. So when they opened this restaurant, they wanted to show off their cafeteria style restaurant, conveyor belts, things like that. But they still wanted to keep the Burger Chef look. So they went vertical with it. You still got that open kite beam look. But I also I found it in color. I'd only really seen it in black and white. They kept that orange. So that iconic bit was still there. This restaurant, again, was all about high volume, but it felt really different from the suburban restaurants. And I kind of love seeing how it tracks bit by bit. So in 1968, the owners of Burger Chef sold it to General Foods. And after that sale, from what Cheyenne and I can gather, Burger Chef was not quite the same. It was a little before our time, we will admit that. So the restaurant declined in business in the 1970s. Really, they might not have been able to recapture that same magic. Again, if I'm an architecture person, these are their restaurants from the late 70s. This could be any Wendy's or something else. So like, I would go back to that iconic architecture. That's just me. But after years of mismanagement and declining profits, Burger Chef was sold, and most of them that were still left in the 1981 became Hardee's. We know it doesn't exist anymore. It still holds a soft spot in lots of people's hearts. You can still go buy a Burger Chef shirt. That's a mouthful. You can see them around Indy sometimes. And we're glad that we were just Indiana was just one little bit of iconic fast food restaurants here. So with that, that's all we have for tonight's road trip. We hope, though, that you'll come back for more IHS programs. If you feel comfortable, come visit us at the Indiana History Center. We'd love if you reserve a ticket ahead of time, but then come check out our exhibits, grab a bite to eat in our cafe, take a walk along Indianapolis's canal. It's a great time of year to do that. If virtual's more your thing, we have more coming up for you. If you enjoyed this road trip, we have one more stop coming at you over on Facebook Live a week from today on Wednesday at 1 p.m. We'll look at the history of Indiana drive-ins with Kathy from earlier today, who talked about sugar cream pie, and another one of our archivists, Mary Gervitz. Join us for Midwestern Roots Light starting on August 11th. It's our virtual mini conference, and we're going to help you tell your family's stories by rebuilding the worlds they lived in, both physically and with paper in the archive. No matter if your ancestor was in urban neighborhoods or rural farms, we'll help you dive into those spaces and places where your family came from. It's shaping up to be a great time. You can find out about how to register for that at indianahistory.org, and then go to the calendar page. We'll drop that link in the chat too. And lastly, in the middle of August, on August 19th, join us for another history happy hour, where we'll learn more about women's professional baseball with our friends from the History Museum in South Bend and from the Indiana Historical Bureau. If you missed your chance to donate or would like to make a further gift to the Indiana Historical Society, please visit the link below. Your donation allows us to keep sharing Hoosier stories and offering free programs like this. Last but not least, certainly, you're going to get an email from us tomorrow morning with links, how you can go read more and visit some of these places, and a survey. It will take you 1 minute. I wrote it really short, but we'd love to know what you think, what you're looking forward to in the future, and how we can make programs like this better in the future. Thank you all again for coming tonight. We hope you stay safe and stay healthy, and we can't wait to see you at an upcoming program soon. Have a good night.